Hello, my name is Merlin Acosta, and today I will be presenting my Educational Leadership Action Research Project titled Improving Student Engagement and Reducing a Chronic Teaism in Middle School. I selected this topic because attendance affects almost every area in student success. When students are not consistently present, they fall behind academically, become less engaged in class, and lose their sense of connection to school. Throughout this project, I focus specifically on middle school students and examine how targeted support could address a chronic teaism while also strengthening student engagement. In this presentation, I will briefly explain the background and purpose of the study, the research questions, the methodology, and data analysis process, the findings, and the next steps that I will take as an educational leader based on what I have learned. This action research project was designed around a practical problem within a school setting. Students missing significant amounts of instructional time and becoming increasingly disconnected from school. The intent of the study was not only to identify students who were absent, but to better understand why those attendance patterns were occurring and what school-based supports could make a difference. I wanted to look beyond attendance as simply a compliance issue and examine it as an academic, social emotional, and leadership issue. The study also focused the idea that improving attendance requires collaboration. Students, families, teachers, support staff, and school leaders all play a role. By examining attendance data together with student engagement, information, and observations, the project aimed to identify practical strategies that could support students and create more sustainable attendance practices. A chronic teaism is a growing concern in middle schools. For this project, chronic teaism refers to students missing approximately 10% or more of the school year. When students miss this amount of time, the effects can be significant. They may develop gaps in learning, struggle to keep pace academically, participate less in class, and become less connected to teachers and peers. Attendance concerns can also affect the overall school climate because students who are frequently absent often need additional academic and behavioral support when they return. The purpose of this study was to identify factors contributing to a chronic absenteeism and examine interventions that could improve both attendance and engagement. The project considered social emotional needs, student motivation, family factors, mentoring, attendance, activities, incentives, relationship building, and family outreach as possible areas of support. The problem addressed in this research was a chronic absenteeism among middle school students and the negative effect it can have in their academic achievement, classroom engagement, and school connection. One important part of the problem is that there is rarely one single reason a student becomes chronically absent. Some students may struggle with motivation or social emotional needs. Others may experience family circumstances, transportation concerns, and other outside factors. For some students, a weak connection to school may also contribute to attendance concerns. The main goal of the project was to improve attendance and engagement through targeted support rather than relying on consequences or attendance notifications. The study examined strategies such as mentoring, social emotional supports, attendance recognition and incentives, consistent monitoring, and stronger communication with families. The goal was to identify an approach the school leaders could use in practical and sustainable way. The research questions guided this project. The first question was, what factors contribute to absenteeism among middle school students? The second question, how do targeted interventions impact attendance and student engagement? The third question, was what role does leadership play in sustaining change? These questions were significant because they allowed the study to look at the problem from more than one perspective. First, leaders need to understand the causes of absenteeism before deciding which intervention to use. The second, schools need to determine whether those interventions are actually improving attendance and engagement. Finally, leadership is important because even effective strategies will not last without consistent monitoring, collaboration, and follow through. This research is significant because improving attendance can support student achievement, strengthen school climate, and provide the school leaders with practical strategies for supporting students before attendance concerns become more severe. The study focused on middle school students at the research site, specifically students in grades 6 through 8 who were identified as a chronically absent or at risk of a chronic absenteeism. Participants were selected through a review of attendance records, students showing a chronic absenteeism indicators, including patterns of missing approximately 10% or more of instructional time, were identified for support. Teachers and support staff involved in the interventions were also important because their observations and feedback provided additional information about student behavior, participation, and engagement. This project used an action research methodology. Action research was appropriate because it allows the educational leader to investigate a problem within a familiar school setting, implement interventions, examine what happens, and then use the results to improve practice. My role included planning, monitoring attendance, supporting interventions, and observing student outcomes and collaborating with staff and families. Multiple sources of data were used so that the project could examine attendance from both quantitative and qualitative perspectives. The data sources include attendance records, student engagement surveys, classroom observations, and academic performance data. Attendance records provided a measurable information about whether student attendance changed over time. Student surveys offered insight into how connected the students felt to school, whether they felt supported by adults, how engaged they were in the classroom. Classroom observations provided an additional information about student participation and academic performance data, helped show how helped show whether the attendance changes occurred alongside changes in academic success. The interventions included mentoring and relationship building activities, social and emotional learning, supports, attendance incentives, and recognition, and family communication and outreach. Using several data sources allowed me to look into the problem more comprehensively instead of relying on one measure alone. The data analysis process focused on identifying patterns across multiple sources of evidence. Attendance data from before and after the intervention period was compared to determine whether students were attending more consistently. Student surveys responses were reviewed and identified changes in engagement, school connections, and perceptions of adult support. Observation notes were examined for trends in classroom participation, and academic performance data was also reviewed. A key part of the analysis was triangulation. Triangulation means comparing different sources of data to determine whether they show similar patterns. One example is if attendance improved, survey results showed stronger school connection. And classroom observations also showed greater participation. Those findings together provided evidence more than one data source alone. Consistent data collection procedures and observations criteria were also used to reduce biases and make the findings more as credible as possible. and useful as well. Before reviewing the findings, I think it's important to return to the original problem. The study focused on the middle school students who were chronically absent or at risk of a chronic absenteeism. And then the frequent absences contributed to gaps in their academic success, um, possible lowering their engagement, having a weaker connection to the school or the adults in the school. And to determine whether the interventions made a difference, the data sources were reviewed together. I compared pre and post interventions attendance information, also reviewed the student engagement survey results, examined classroom observation trends, and considered academic performance indicators. Looking at these sources together was important because attendance is not an isolated issue. A student may attend more frequently but still remain disengaged, or a student may feel more connected while continuing to experience outside barriers that affect attendance. The analysis therefore focused on the overall pattern across attendance, engagement, observations, and academics rather than relying on a single outcome. The most major finding was an improvement in average attendance. In the simulated sample data, average attendance increased from 82% before the interventions to 91%. After the intervention period, that is a 9 percentage point increase. These findings suggest that the targeted supports can be associated with the meaningful improvements in attendance. The intervention approach did not rely on one strategy. Students received support such as mentoring from an adult, check-ins, family outreach, attendance recognition, and ongoing monitoring. The increase is important and should be celebrated because the goal was not simply to tell students to attend school. More often, the goal was to create a stronger support around the student. So mentoring helps strengthen connections with the adults in the building. Family outreach supported in identifying what factors prevented the student from attending school. And it increases the student participation, right? And then the incentives reinforced positive attendance habits. Overall, the attendance data suggests that students may respond more positively when schools combine con- accountability with relationships, encouragement, and individualized support. Because what one student may need may look very different from another student's needs. So it's being able to identify that individualized support to ensure that students are receiving um, the supports they need to get them to school and be engaged and help them become academically successful. The second finding looks specifically at the number of students who remained in the chronic absenteeism range. In the simulated sample, the number of chronically absent students decreased from 18 students to 8 students. After the intervention period, this decrease suggests that the targeted monitoring and layered supports helped a number of students move out of that chronic absenteeism category. Identifying students earlier was also allowed the staff to respond before attendance patterns became even more severe. At the same time, the fact that A students still remain chronically absent is important. It shows that no intervention works for every student. Some students may face different barriers that require more of an intensive or individualized support. And then this finding reinforces the need for a tiered approach in which some students receive universal encouragement, others may receive a more of a targeted mentoring or family outreach, and students with persistent attendance concerns receive more of an intensive individualized intervention. The third finding examined the average number of days where students were absent. In the simulated data, the average absences decreased from 16.2 to 8.7 days. This represents a meaningful reduction in the missed instructional time. Reducing the number of absences matters because every additional day in school gives students more access to direct instruction, teacher feedback, um, academic support, classroom routines, and also building those relationships with their peers and the adults in the building. The decline in absences also suggests that earlier outreach may prevent attendance concerns from becoming more severe. When schools wait until a student has already missed a large amount of school, it becomes much harder to recover academically, and rebuild consistent routines. So this finding supports the importance of monitoring attendance frequently, and intervening earlier rather than waiting until the student has already reached the chronic absenteeism threshold, um, where now the student has lost more academic instruction time. Now, the fourth finding focused on student engagement and school connection. The simulated data showed improvement across all three engagement indicators. School connection increased uh, from 46% to 75%. The adult support increased from 42% to 83%. And then the classroom participation increased from 54% to 79%. The largest increase was the students' perception of adult support. And this is specifically important because relationships were one of the strongest themes throughout the project. When students know that an adult notices or cares for them when they are absent, checks in when they return, and consistently supports them, they feel a stronger connection to school and a sense of belonging. That sense of connection can influence classroom participation, and lowering of the students' absences. These findings suggest that attendance interventions should not focus only on the absences itself, um, but building relationships and increasing school connection can be um, an important part of improving attendance and engagement. The fifth finding examined academic performance. In the simulated data, the percentage of students passing all of their core classes increased from 58% to 79%. It is important not to claim that improved attendance alone caused the academic improvement. However, the pattern is meaningful because students cannot fully benefit from instruction when they're not present. More consistent attendance gives students greater access to the classroom instruction, assignments, teacher support, collaboration with their peers, and other opportunities to ask questions. When this academic finding is considered alongside the attendance and engagement data, the overall picture becomes stronger. Students were attending more frequently, reporting stronger adult support and school connections, participating more in class and showing stronger academic indicators. Together, the findings suggest that attendance, engagement, relationships, and academic success are closely connected. When the findings are reviewed together, four major themes emerge. The first theme is that relationships matter. Students respond more and in a positive way when a trusted adult checks on them consistently. And it shows how genuine the adult is about them. The second theme is that family communication matters. and a proactive outreach helped the school identify barriers earlier and created stronger partnerships between home and school. The third theme is that attendance and engagement are connected. Students who attend school more consistently also showed stronger participation and connection to the school. The fourth theme is that layered support work better than relying on one strategy alone. Mentoring, social emotional supports, incentives, monitoring, and family outreach work together to address the student needs. These themes connect directly to the research questions and by identifying factors related to absenteeism, showing how targeted interventions can support improvement and highlight the role of leadership in organizing and sustaining those supports. The findings have several implications for future practice. First, a chronic teism is influenced by multiple factors, including motivation, family circumstances, social emotional needs, and school connection. Because the causes vary, schools need flexible and tiered interventions. My next steps would include creating a structured monitoring and check-in program, reviewing attendance data regularly through an MTSS process, strengthening the family outreach, continuing the attendance recognition, and providing more intensive support for students with a persistent concerns in absenteeism. The findings will also be shared with administrators, teachers, counselors, and support teams through PLCs, leadership meetings, and professional development. So the attendance improvement becomes a collaborative responsibility than a one person responsibility. My professional growth goal is to develop a sustainable data informed attendance intervention system that combines early identification, student relationships, family partnerships, and tiered supports. As an educational leader, I want to use data not only to identify problems, but to guide the action plan, right? Monitor the progress and continuously improve the systems that support students. The references listed on this final slide represent the research and professional resources that informed the development of this action research project. These sources supported the project in areas including chronic absenteeism, attendance interventions, social emotional learning, student engagement strategies, family partnerships, and leadership practices. Rather than reading each reference individually, I wanted to emphasize that the scholarly research helped me guide both the intervention choices and the conclusions drawn from the project. Overall, this action research reinforced that a chronic absenteeism is a complex issue that requires data, relationships, collaboration, early intervention, and consistent leadership. As school leaders, our responsibility is not simply to identify who is absent, but to understand the barriers behind the absence and create systems that help students reconnect with school. Um, Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you staying this far. Thank you.